The moment I stepped into the courtroom, the world seemed to shrink around me. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat echoing the dread I'd carried for weeks. The air was thick with whispers and the cold, sterile scent of polished wood. I tried to steady my breath, but my hands trembled as I clutched the folder that held everything: my evidence, my hope, my last line of defense. I scanned the room, searching for a familiar face, some sign of comfort, but all I found was my mother, sitting with her arms crossed, lips curled in a smirk. She glanced at me, then let out a soft, mocking laugh, just loud enough for me to hear. My father sat beside her, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. When he finally looked up, he shook his head, disappointment etched deep into every line of his face. I felt the sting of humiliation burn through me, sharper than any words they could have spoken. I wanted to turn and run, to disappear and pretend this wasn't happening, but I forced myself to keep walking. Every step felt heavier, weighed down by memories of family dinners, birthday parties, and the warmth I once believed was unconditional. Now, all of that seemed like a cruel joke. I could feel the eyes of strangers on me, their curiosity mixing with pity, as if they were all silently asking the same question I was: what could possibly drive a family to this point? How did it come to this, my own parents against me? Before the courtroom, there was hope. I grew up in a house that, from the outside, looked like the picture of happiness. Our front yard was always trimmed, the porch light always on, and laughter often spilled from the windows on summer evenings. My mother would braid my hair before school, humming softly, and my father would ruffle my hair when he came home from work, his hands rough but his smile gentle. I remember thinking that nothing could ever break us apart. But even then, small cracks were forming, hairline fractures that would one day split wide open. It started with little things. My older brother, Daniel, always seemed to shine a bit brighter in their eyes. He brought home trophies, straight A's, and a confidence that filled every room. My parents beamed at his every achievement, their pride unmistakable. I tried to follow in his footsteps, desperate for the same approval. I joined clubs, studied late into the night, and brought home my own report cards, hoping for a spark of that same pride. But my efforts were met with polite nods, a quick "that's nice, honey," before the conversation shifted back to Daniel's latest accomplishment. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself that love wasn't a competition, that my parents cared for me in their own quiet way. But as the years passed, the distance grew. My mother's compliments became rare, replaced by subtle criticisms. My clothes were too plain, my friends too strange, my dreams too unrealistic. My father, once quick with a joke or a hug, became withdrawn, his attention reserved for Daniel's sports games or business plans. I felt myself shrinking, my voice growing smaller in a house that no longer felt like home. I tried harder. I volunteered for chores, stayed out of trouble, and even took up piano lessons because I heard my mother mention once that she wished she'd learned as a child. But nothing seemed to bridge the gap. Family dinners became tense, conversations clipped and careful. I watched as my parents and Daniel shared inside jokes, their laughter a private language I couldn't understand. I started spending more time in my room, finding comfort in books and music, anything that made the silence less suffocating. Still, I clung to hope. I believed that if I just worked harder, if I just became someone they could be proud of, things would change. I dreamed of the day my mother would look at me with the same warmth she reserved for Daniel, or my father would brag about me to his friends. I told myself that families go through rough patches, that love could weather any storm. But deep down, I felt the ache of being on the outside, looking in. The years blurred together, each one marked by a growing sense of isolation. I learned to hide my disappointment, to laugh at my own expense, to pretend that the coldness didn't hurt. I became an expert at reading the room, anticipating my parents' moods, and avoiding topics that might trigger their disapproval. I watched as Daniel moved out, celebrated, and returned for holidays, always welcomed with open arms. I wondered if I would ever feel that sense of belonging again. But everything changed the day I discovered the truth. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky feels heavy and the world seems to press in on you. I was searching for an old photo album in the attic, hoping to find some piece of childhood comfort, when I stumbled across a battered box labeled with my name. Curiosity pulled me in. Inside, I found envelopes, bank statements, letters, and a college acceptance packet I'd never seen before. My hand shook as I read through them, piecing together a story I was never meant to know. My college fund, the one my grandparents had set up for me, was gone. Every last cent. The statements showed withdrawal after withdrawal, all signed by my mother. I felt my stomach drop, a cold wave of disbelief washing over me. I remember the day I told my parents I wanted to apply to art school, how they'd insisted we couldn't afford it, how they'd pushed me toward community college instead. I'd believed them. I trusted them. Now, staring at the evidence, I realized they'd lied to my face. I confronted them that evening, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. I laid the papers on the kitchen table, demanding an explanation. My mother barely glanced at them before rolling her eyes. "You wouldn't have made it at that school anyway," she said, her tone dismissive. "We needed the money for more important things." My father just shrugged, refusing to meet my gaze. "You're being dramatic," he muttered. "It's not as big a deal as you're making it out to be." Their words hit me like a slap. I tried to make them see how much it hurt, how betrayed I felt, but they twisted everything. My mother accused me of being ungrateful, of making things up for attention. My father told me to grow up, to stop living in the past. The more I pleaded, the colder they became, until I realized I was talking to strangers. The people who were supposed to protect me had stolen from me, lied to me, and now they were gaslighting me, making me question my own reality. I left the house that night, the rain soaking through my clothes as I walked aimlessly, numb and lost. I thought it couldn't get worse, but I was wrong. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of what had happened, desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. I reached out to my closest friends, hoping for comfort, but their reactions were a mix of awkward silence and hesitant disbelief. "Are you sure?" one of them asked, her voice gentle but skeptical. "Maybe there's a misunderstanding. Your parents always seemed so supportive." I wanted to scream, to shake them and make them see the truth, but I could feel myself slipping further into isolation. The more I tried to explain, the more I sounded like the villain in my own story. I called my aunt my mother's sister, who had always been a little kinder to me than the rest of the family. I poured out everything, the missing money, the confrontation, the way my parents had dismissed me. She listened quietly, then sighed. "Families go through tough times," she said, her words careful and measured. "Maybe you should just let it go. You don't want to make things worse." Her response stung more than I expected. I realized then that my parents had already started spinning their version of events, painting me as ungrateful, unstable, maybe even vindictive. The next time I saw my parents, it was at a family gathering. I could feel the shift in the air as soon as I walked in. Conversation stopped, eyes darted away, and my cousin barely managed a weak smile before excusing herself. My mother greeted me with a tight-lipped grin, her voice dripping with false concern. "We're all worried about you," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've been acting so strange lately." My father stood beside her, arms crossed, nodding in agreement. I realized with a sickening clarity that they were turning everyone against me, brick by brick, until I was completely alone. I tried to defend myself, to explain what had really happened, but every word felt like shouting into a void. My relatives exchanged glances, their faces a mix of pity and suspicion. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the way they clung to the version of my parents they'd always known. I left early, my chest tight with frustration and grief. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every accusation, wondering if I should just give up. But something inside me refused to let go. I started researching, reading about legal options, and gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I met with a lawyer, my hands shaking as I slid the folder across the table. She listened carefully, her expression serious, and told me I had a case. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I could fight back. The decision to take legal action wasn't easy. I knew it would mean airing our family's dirty laundry in public, risking what little support I had left. I worried about the fallout, about what people would say, about whether I could handle the pressure. But every time I thought about backing down, I remembered the look on my mother's face, the sound of her laugh in the courtroom, and the way my father had shaken his head, as if I was nothing more than a disappointment. I realized I couldn't let them win, not this time. I started documenting everything, keeping records of every conversation, every message, every attempt they made to discredit me. I braced myself for the backlash, for the whispers and the judgment, but I refused to let fear control me. I was determined to stand up for myself, even if it meant standing alone. As the court date approached, the tension grew unbearable. My parents doubled down, spreading rumors, twisting the story until I barely recognized it. Friends stopped returning my calls, and even my brother, Daniel, told me I was making a mistake. I felt more isolated than ever, but beneath the loneliness was a growing sense of resolve. I knew what I had to do, but I had no idea what it would cost me. The night before I filed the lawsuit, I sat alone in my apartment, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. My phone was silent, no messages from friends, no calls from family. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks, wondering how my life had unraveled so quickly. Every memory of my parents felt tainted now. Holidays, birthdays, even the smallest gestures of kindness. I replayed every conversation in my mind, searching for signs I'd missed, clues that might have warned me. The loneliness was suffocating, a weight I carried everywhere I went. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie awake for hours, my mind racing with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. What if I lost? What if I was wrong? What if this fight destroyed what little was left of my family? Some nights, I almost convinced myself to drop it all, to let my parents win just so I could have peace. But then I'd remember the look in my mother's eyes, the way she laughed at me in the courtroom, and the cold indifference in my father's voice. I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself now, I never would. The day I signed the papers, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. My lawyer watched me, her eyes kind but firm, reminding me that I was doing the right thing. I tried to believe her. I tried to believe that justice mattered more than keeping the peace, that my pain was real and deserved to be acknowledged. I walked out of her office feeling both terrified and strangely free, as if I'd finally taken control of my own story. I knew the road ahead would be brutal. I knew my parents would fight back, that the courtroom would become a battleground for every old wound and buried secret. But I also knew I couldn't turn back. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself, even if it meant standing alone. I thought the worst was behind me, but the courtroom would reveal even more. The courtroom was colder than I remembered, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glare. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. My parents sat across from me, their lawyer whispering in their ears, my mother's lips curled in that same mocking smile. My father's eyes were hard, his jaw set, as if he was bracing himself for battle. I could feel the weight of every stare in the room, strangers, distant relatives, even a few old family friends who'd come to watch the spectacle. I wondered what they saw when they looked at me. A traitor, a victim, or just a desperate child trying to be heard. The proceedings began, the judge's voice echoing through the room, formal and detached. My parents' lawyer went first, painting a picture of me as unstable, ungrateful, and vindictive. He spoke of family misunderstandings, of youthful confusion, and implied that I was exaggerating for attention. My mother nodded along, occasionally dabbing her eyes with a tissue, while my father sat stone-faced, refusing to look at me. Every word felt like a fresh wound, reopening old scars I'd tried so hard to heal. When it was my turn, I stood up, my legs trembling but my voice steady. I told my story, starting from the beginning, the missing college fund, the lies, the gaslighting. I laid out the evidence, the bank statements, the forged signatures, the emails I'd found hidden in the attic. I watched as the judge's expression shifted from polite interest to concern, then to disbelief. I could feel the room leaning in, the tension thick enough to choke on. My parents' lawyer tried to poke holes in my story, questioning my memory, my motives, even my sanity. My mother played her part perfectly, feigning confusion and hurt, insisting she'd only ever wanted what was best for me. My father finally spoke, his voice cold and dismissive, accusing me of trying to tear the family apart for money. I felt the old shame rising in my chest, the urge to shrink back, to apologize for making a scene. But I held my ground, refusing to let their words define me. Then came the turning point. My lawyer presented a series of emails between my parents, discussing how to access my college fund without my knowledge. The words were damning, their intentions laid bare for everyone to see. My mother's face went pale, her composure slipping for the first time. My father shifted uncomfortably, his hands clenching into fists. The judge asked them direct questions, and their answers grew more evasive, their lies unraveling with every word. I looked around the courtroom and saw the shock on the faces of those who doubted me. My aunt, who told me to let it go, sat with her mouth open, her eyes darting between me and my parents. Even Daniel, who'd barely spoken to me in months, looked shaken, his confidence in our parents visibly crumbling. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a troublemaker or a disappointment, but as someone who'd been wronged and had the courage to fight back. The judge called for a recess, and I stepped outside, my heart pounding with a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. I'd exposed the truth. I'd stood up to the people who'd tried to break me. I thought, for a moment, that maybe this was the end, that justice had finally been served. But as I returned to the courtroom, ready for the verdict, my parents' lawyer requested to submit one final piece of evidence. The judge allowed it, and suddenly, the air shifted again. My mother whispered something to my father, her eyes darting nervously. The lawyer handed over a sealed envelope, and the judge opened it, scanning the contents with a furrowed brow. The judge looked up, his voice grave. There appears to be another matter that needs to be addressed. My heart dropped, dread pooling in my stomach. I glanced at my parents, and for the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. The judge motioned for me to approach, and as I did, I realized that the fight wasn't over. There was still one secret left, one final truth waiting to be revealed. But just when I thought it was over, one final secret came out. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom, final and unyielding. The verdict was in my favor. My parents were ordered to repay what they had taken, and the truth of their actions was now a matter of public record. For a moment, I felt a wave of vindication, a sense that justice had finally been served. But as I looked across the room at my parents, the reality of what I'd lost settled over me like a heavy blanket. My mother's face twisted in rage, her eyes burning with a fury I'd never seen before. She refused to look at me, her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. My father sat in stunned silence, his shoulders slumped, the fight drained from him. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the pain they'd caused, only a cold, empty distance that felt even sharper than their betrayal. I searched their faces for any sign of regret, any flicker of the love I'd once believed was unbreakable, but found nothing. The people who had raised me, who had once been my whole world, were now strangers on the other side of a courtroom. As the room emptied, I felt the eyes of everyone on me, some filled with sympathy, others with judgment. My aunt approached, her expression softening as she reached for my hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. Daniel lingered by the door, his face pale, his loyalty torn. He didn't say anything, just nodded once before slipping away. I realized then that the victory I'd fought so hard for had come at a price I hadn't fully understood. Outside, the sky was gray, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I stood on the courthouse steps, the folder of documents pressed to my chest, and tried to make sense of everything I'd been through. I had won, but the cost was steep. The family I'd spent my whole life trying to please was gone, replaced by a painful clarity I couldn't escape. I wondered if justice was worth the loneliness, if the truth could ever fill the space left by love lost. I thought about the years I'd spent chasing approval, the sleepless nights, the endless self-doubt. I thought about the courage it had taken to stand up for myself, to demand the respect I deserved. I knew I could never go back to the way things were, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the real victory was finding the strength to walk away, to choose myself even when it hurt. As I walked away from the courthouse, I couldn't help but ask myself, was it worth it to lose my family for the truth? Months have passed since that day in the courtroom, and my life looks nothing like it did before. The ache of loss is still there, but it's softer now, dulled by time and the small joys I've learned to let in. I moved to a new city, started a job I actually care about, and slowly built a circle of friends who see me for who I am, not who I was supposed to be. There are still moments when the old pain creeps in. Holidays, birthdays, quiet Sunday mornings, but I've learned to let those feelings come and go without letting them define me. Healing hasn't been easy. Some days, I still wonder if things could have turned out differently, if I could have saved my family and myself from so much hurt. But I also know now that my worth isn't measured by anyone else's approval. I am stronger than I ever imagined, and I've learned that real family isn't always the one you're born into. It's the people who choose to stand by you, even when things get hard. If you're facing betrayal, remember you're not alone. There is life after heartbreak, and there is hope after loss. The truth can be painful, but it can also set you free. I found my strength in the ruins of what I thought I needed most, and I discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself.